Engage. Disrupt. Adapt. Repeat. You're listening to Pure Reinvention, the podcast for curious people.
Misty, this was probably the fastest 20 minutes I've experienced in my life.
He is so interesting. He has a lot to share and a lot of really good information about Detroit.
I guess what really appealed to me the most was his ability to kind of discuss this in a very simplified manner so that I could understand completely what he was talking about and actually get quite excited about it.
And he talks about passion in the interview, so I'm excited for everyone to listen into that. But his passion, Stan's passion in social media and how that can create the conversation of today was so interesting to listen to.
I think you've got a really good point. Passion is contagious, and Stan had it. Let's listen. We are excited today to welcome Stan Smith, CEO of Pushing Social. Stan is also heavily involved in ASAE 2015 through the Detroit Metro Convention and Visitors Bureau. Welcome, Stan.
It's great to be here.
Thank you very much. I know you just came back from California where you were a part of I'm going to guess, a global conference on social media. So this is, we're getting the hot topics right as it's coming towards.
Absolutely. And I'm glad that when I got back, spring has finally broke here in Michigan. So
yes,
I'm happy to be back.
Yes, we are looking forward to all of the seasons, but this is one season we're really looking forward to.
Everybody has a spring in their step.
Stan, the ASAE 2015 project coming to Detroit is a really important project for the city of Detroit, and more importantly, the kind of work you're doing in helping people connect to the awesomeness that's going to happen during that time.
Right.
Can you give us a little bit of your background and how you got into social media and why this is such a passion of yours?
Absolutely. I've been in marketing for 20 years, and I was the guy back in 1995 that was talking about the internet. And my first real job was with a mainstay of Michigan advertising, Donor Advertising. And Donor, when I was there, I was the guy I made a goal of saying the word internet 3 times, at least every day I was at work. So finally we got to a point where we had a client that needed internet services, and they says, there's this skinny black kid that keeps saying internet all the time there, so maybe we should talk to him about it. And that's how I kind of got my start. So I've always been doing digital marketing for the last 15 years. And about 5 years ago, I was hearing a lot about Facebook. And the first time I heard about Facebook is I was putting together a media plan. And while doing that media plan, somebody said you should consider Facebook. And I was like, Facebook, isn't that the Harvard little company there? Why would we want to work with Facebook? It doesn't even make any sense. And I said, no, we're not going to work with, they're only on the Ivy League schools. That was a big mistake.
Yes, hindsight, yes.
I know, in hindsight. But as I was hearing this, I started to really get intrigued by the enthusiasm around social media. And I started talking to people, and at that point, I realized that the conversation was enthusiastic, but it wasn't really substantive. And people weren't really talking about how to use it for business in a real way. So I decided to experiment with it by starting my own blog called Pushing Social. The thought is I was going to push the social media evangelist at that time to really make this applicable to nonprofits, to cities, to business organizations. And like they say, I went native. I loved social media. I loved blogging, and I love Twitter and Facebook and how those tools can enable people to tell their stories. So that's how I got my start.
So how does your background, and obviously your passion, I can tell from just listening to your voice that you are passionate about
Just
this
a little
area.
bit.
How does that passion translate to why the Detroit Metro Convention and Visitors Bureau contracted you to assist them with ASAE 2015?
Right. Well, you got to think about Detroit in itself. The city has an amazing story. It's woven into the fabric of this country. And if you're not telling Detroit's story, then I don't know what type of story you're telling about our country. So the challenge here was people believed our city is different than we see it. And I saw this as an opportunity to really talk about, yes, Detroit has had some tough times, but Detroit also is a city that shows tremendous resiliency, the tremendous creativity, and I wanted to be a part of telling the news story of the comeback city. And I think everybody can identify with Detroit because just look back to 2008. We all have been scuffed up just a bit by our economy.
It's
we
absolutely
all have
true.
to retell our story. And I felt like Detroit's story was my story, was everybody's story, and I wanted to be involved with that. And I think the people here saw my passion for telling that story in a different way and engaging with people using social tools to do that.
Now, what I heard you say, Stan, is that sometimes the way we see the company, or in this case the city, or the way we see an association on the inside, is different than the way people see it on the outside. How are you using social media to connect all of those parts that have the great potential to be disconnected?
I think social media finally gives us the incentive to first start looking at the story in a substantive way. All right, so what do we represent? So talking about an association, what do we represent? An association oftentimes is the vision standard bearer for their particular industry. So where do we see this industry going? And how are the good people in this organization taking our members into that future and equipping them to live in that future? So once that story is crafted, what's the next step? The next step is, how do we get this story in front of the people at their digital water coolers? So if they're congregating around Twitter, how do we get that there in a small chunk so they can understand? If we have a blog, how can we expand that story into a format where people can dive in deeply on some of the things that we believe in and the story we want to tell? Or in Facebook, how can we start to express the culture of the people that's working in this association? So not only can the associations now with social media be personable, they even can be personal with people. And I think that that is the opportunity. So really, when you think about associations, the competitive advantage is not so much of how we're using social tools. That's important, but the competitive advantage is how you're telling the story of what you believe about the future of your particular industry. And that translates to cities as well as businesses.
So whether it's a for-profit, whether it's a municipality, whether it's a not-for-profit association, make sure I'm understanding you correctly. The leader's role is to set that vision,
Right.
to create the space for a story to be told,
Right.
that will then inspire either your current membership or potential future membership to be a part of that journey.
You nailed it.
And so how does social media specifically, is that like the only way we do this, or is it one of the many tools that a business or an association or a municipality has to be engaged in so that we recognize there's a diverse customer base, membership base that we're attracting, not a homogenous customer base? Because that's kind of what I'm hearing you say is we're moving from a homogenous world to a very diverse world.
Right. Social media, first of all, is very efficient. So, for example, a lot of businesses that may have a B2B audience, for example, going on LinkedIn and starting that conversation is a very efficient way of targeting the people who may be interested in your story. So LinkedIn is a social media network, right? Is also very effective because what we are able to do with social media is not the tools we've had in the past. I can engage on social media and I also can listen on social media. So I can get a feel for what people are interested in. What subjects do they want to talk about? What's resonating? What questions keep coming up again and again? Who are the leaders in that conversation currently that we may want to reach out and start a relationship with? So when we had just TV commercials to work with, we had no way of listening to the people who are watching the television commercial. We weren't getting any new information, any new ways to make our story connect. So I think that's why social media is efficient. With 1.5 billion people on Facebook, pretty much everyone is on Facebook. So it's efficient. You can get your message out at scale, but it's effective because now we can, in real time, really effectively or re-engineer our story, retell our story in different ways to match the needs of the audience.
Okay, now I want to really kind of deep dive on this thought.
Let's go for it.
You made a comment that really is intriguing to me. In many of our other marketing strategies, we are pushing a message out. What you just taught me was that social media allows us to not only push out a message, but to listen to the reaction and then be able to adjust our message based on the feedback that we get from that, closing that loop.
Right.
Now, that's a brand new form of communication that businesses and municipalities and not-for-profits have never had access to before. Historically, we used focus groups, we've used networking, right, one-on-one or small group networking, but never have we had a tool that allows us to get feedback to this degree.
Well, Mike, I would like to say that it's actually a very old tool. I think the killer app for this type of communication has been the Campfire, right? It's a conversation. We've been doing it since.
It is a conversation.
Only social media is doing is scaling that and making it profitable. Okay.
But interestingly enough, businesses have struggled
Right.
with something as basic as the conversation.
Right.
And what you're saying is we're going back to a very basic and primitive form of communication, which is pure communication.
Exactly. It's extremely effective. It builds nations, right?
Well, what's interesting is if you go back and look at some of the major disruptions in countries, a lot of that disruption was fueled by the social media networking. And countries who are fearful of disruption shut down social networking and communications because it is such a valid form of rallying around a cause.
You're exactly right.
Now, why then can't we use that to help municipalities heal some of the ills that they're dealing with? How come we're not using that in the association world to build what is their primary objective, which is this group of individuals who are all interested in this vision of where this mission is going?
Yeah, and I think that the barrier, the why not, is I believe that maybe some of my peers and myself included has made it about the technology. And really, when you walk into an association and I see an association president, he says, "Stan, I don't get this social media thing." And I says, "Well, tell me about your background." And he launches or she launches into a story that is rich and is engaging. And I says, "Tell me about why you work here." Same thing.
Yes.
Why are people coming in every day to do this?
Yes, the passion of the work.
The passion and the story. And as he's communicating that, one time I actually started recording it. And I says, after the conversation, I says, "I just want you to know that you just did a podcast." And it can go on iTunes. And he was blown away. And he says, "Well, wait a second. This isn't." I'm like, "You're letting the technology stand as a barrier. Just tell your distribute it."
What's interesting, Stan, is that while step one in the reinvention process is disruption, which perhaps social media is, step two is ownership, which someone has to take ownership of whatever you're doing. But step three is simplification, which what you did was just reduce to a very simple understanding that the opportunity to disrupt, to do something new, but don't let technology be the barrier. 2, own it. And 3, just tell me your story.
Just simplify it.
It's simple. Don't let all of these other barriers get in the way. It's very, very simple.
Right.
And you were able to apply that, or you are applying that to help your customer base to use the power of communication.
Definitely.
Basic, straightforward, campfire communication.
Right. And then also recognize that the audience that you serve are just as enthusiastic. There's always a subset of that audience that's just as enthusiastic about you as you are about them. And really, social media is about going out and finding, or content marketing is all about going out and finding those people and giving them your microphone. We say at the DMCVB a lot, we have a very big stage and a very big microphone to talk about what's great about our city. And we want to find the people who are just as enthusiastic and just as passionate and share the microphone.
So let's take this opportunity to talk for a minute about, again, your role at the CVB, but specifically to ASAE 2015. This podcast will be broadcast pre-ASAE, which will, if people are listening to this, they'll have a chance to look for your work. Help us understand what your work looks like. So when we go to the website, when we are wanting to look for your signature work, what does that going to look like?
Right. And I think that I'm working with a tremendous team here of content marketers and social media marketers who get it. And I'm just really assisting them in getting that message out there. And you ask a great question. How will we see Detroit support ASAE, a great opportunity for the city? It's a great opportunity for us because we're going to be inviting a lot of folks who are interested and curious about why Detroit matters when it comes to bringing my business here
why
or
Detroit
convention.
matters.
Right. So we're able to make that case while they're here. And that's the one thing that I'm laser focused on. One thing we want to do is that we want to make sure that people understand the new things that are happening around the city that makes coming here very enjoyable. Okay, so you're going to see that in not podcasts, but in blog posts that are going to be talking about some of the things that you can do within a walkable distance of Kobo. You're going to be seeing that in pictures. So we're going to be actively capturing the visuals of the people enjoying our city and showing people that some of the new things that you can do around here through the visuals. And you can see that on Instagram. You can see that on Visit Detroit as well.
You're familiarizing people with Detroit before they get here.
That's exactly it. What I like to say is that actually Detroit is made up of a lot of tightly knit neighborhoods that have their own culture of their own. And we just really want to introduce them to that because we don't want people to think that our city is dangerous, dirty, and boring, all right? It's not it at all. And if you're here, you spend any time here, you'll see that this city is fun, it's safe, and it's vibrant.
But you do have to experience that because that's not necessarily what people learn by reading what the...
And we're going to show them. We're going to show them as much as we can through social media. So we have incredible writers here who are going to be talking about that story in long form, and then we're going to be showing it through pictures, through video as well.
Sure. What an awesome implementation of a strategy that begins to showcase what's already happening and allowing I assume that feedback loop to then be completed. How does an association take advantage of this same kind of technology to start to showcase all the wonderful good things that are happening within their business and be able to pull in and familiarize people who are not a part of the association, who are not members currently, but can be pulled in just like you're trying to do to make people familiar with Detroit and to look forward to and gravitate towards participating?
It starts at the top. All right, so it's going to start with the association president. And the association president has to sit his team down and say, we're going to create a strategy that fundamentally trusts people to come to the right decision about our association if we give them the right information, number one. So after that strategy is created, then the second thing is how do we construct the story of our association? Now, I use a methodology in my mind that is called the hero's journey. I'm not sure if you've heard of it, but the hero's journey was put together by, I think his name is John Campbell. And he said that every story that has endured has a structure. Okay, and you go through a hero's journey. You have the normal life, you have a challenge, and then you decide that you're going to embark on a new journey. You bring your allies and you bring your mentors. You have this incredible battle with your enemy. You come through, and then you take your message to the world. Whatever your methodology might be, by the way, that hero's journey, people will recognize it if you watch Star Wars or you watch The Matrix or Rocky.
Sure.
Right.
Yeah,
so it's the exact same thing. But for example, with one association I work with, we actually came up with our story using that framework, and people are kind of excited because they're going, "Wow, we're a lot more interesting than we thought we were."
Right. But people are always worried about the framework. So you say, "Don't worry about the framework. Here's the framework. Hang your stuff on the already existing framework."
Right. So once you have your story in place, then now you can say, what are the platforms that allow us to tell that in a very compelling fashion? And what are the platforms that we can invest in and perhaps dominate? For example, with Detroit, people don't know that we have 8,000 photos of the city. Guess
would know?
what?
Who would know?
Right. And I was like, when I heard that, I almost fell out of my seat. And I'm like, well, we should be all over Instagram and Flickr, and we have been doing a great job, but that is a platform we could dominate. No other city has 8,000 photos in this repository that are great and that show off the city. So you want to find that platform that caters to your strength. And then once you find those platforms, create a day-to-day action plan to build telling your story into your workflow so you can tell it on these social platforms.
Stan, I want to tell you this is one of the fastest 20 minutes that we've had in our podcast. And
I could talk all day.
I want to thank you for making it enjoyable. Don't say that. We're liable to have you back. We're here with Stan Smith, CEO of Pushing Social, who's one of the key leaders in the city of Detroit with his leadership towards the ASAE 2015 project, and he's teaching us about all of these wonderful ways in which we can apply that to our associations, the for-profit world, municipalities. It's not really that hard, but you have to be committed.
Thank you.
Thank you, Stan.
All right.
Misty, is social media really that disruptive?
I think that social media is disruptive today because of the technology. But being social is not a very disruptive or new concept. We are communicators by nature. We want to talk, we want to communicate. Sometimes that's verbal, sometimes that's nonverbal, but that's how we understand one another.
I think that is such a great point, and I think that's where social media gets tripped up on as associations and businesses look at the application, is they get tripped up on the technology and they don't go back to that basic, simple understanding, Misty, that you just described, which is it's just another way in which we communicate with one another. And isn't that probably the number one way we attract people to our business or to our association, is through that very simple, basic communication?
Yeah, and Stan said it right. He said communication builds nations, and without that, what are we? Nothing at all. We need that open line of communication to learn from each other, find out what we need, find out what we like, what we don't like, and build on that.
I think that for a lot of us, and I want to say me included, that social media perhaps was a disruption because that was the technology. Yet when we really go and look at the basic understanding of how we build things, communication in all of its different forms is a key ingredient. And Stan was able to distill that into something very basic and very understandable, no matter what your age or no matter what your experience.
And Stan epitomized one of our Pure Reinvention fundamentals, which was keep it simple, simplify. He could simply explain, he could simply discuss, and he really knows that at the root of social media, it's a very simple process. And that's a lesson that we can't push for more enough.
No, I thought that was an absolutely phenomenal lesson. And the other lesson that I think follows along in that simplification theme is Stan's comment, and I want to make sure I get this right, but his comment to not let the process trip you up, but to truly focus on what your story is. And I think for some of us, we're afraid that our story isn't going to be very compelling or our story isn't going to be very interesting. And yet the number one thing we have to really encourage people to do is to take your story and tell it and share it in a way that is interesting for others. And don't worry about what process or whatever you're going to hang, whatever technology you're going to hang this on, but really focus on what is your story today.
And that's what Detroit is doing such a good job at. Detroit has learned how to tell their story, and they're doing an incredible job of passing that story on through social media and through other networks and really share the story of Detroit, which is a motivating story of comeback, rebuilding, and I forget the movies he referenced, but there is a tried and true model for a good story. But just because that there's this format, it doesn't mean that whatever you're coloring in between those lines can't be your own version.
And what was really interesting was as Stan got into this project and he started to recognize all the wonderful opportunities that there was in this space to tell the story of Detroit, he discovered this treasure trove of pictures that was available.
What was it, 8,000?
It was some
That's an amazing
incredible number. And that then began to adjust their process and their ability to tell the story, because that was a significant asset that, according to Stan, very few could duplicate. And so it's almost a challenge to those executives and key leaders who are listening to this is to be able to really be able to answer that question, what is the story?
Mm-hmm. And early on in the interview with Stan, he said something that was really striking to me. He said, people believed the city was different than we knew it to be. And that was what I heard was outsiders. And now he's able to connect that story through this social engagement and through this awesome technology and tell the story that, hey, the city that you think you know, it's not really that at all. Let us show you. Let us show you these amazing pictures. Let us tell you about the people on the streets and the good work that they're doing.
Misty, you bring up an incredible point, and I think it happens over and over and over again, and that is we allow the story on the inside to permeate to people on the outside that have no idea or do not share the same perspective or are not biased the way we are. And so probably not on purpose, but from the inside we bias the message and we bias the story.
And the outsiders just don't know. That's something that we need to keep in mind too. Until we tell our story, until we're really communicating what we're living and experiencing, how are they going to know? They won't.
I think a part of the pure reinvention model, which we've absolutely got dead on right, is to really be aware of what the opportunity is on the outside and to allow the opportunity and openness on the outside to drive the storytelling from the inside to connect those two parts together, which is Stan described, then using a specific platform, whether it's Facebook or whether it's Twitter or whatever the methodology that you're using is, it's using what's unique and what's special and driving the story that is of interest to the people that are listening.
Stan said, what caters to your strength? Find your strengths and then do that in the day-to-day. Make that into a day-to-day action plan.
Remember, if you're ready for a change, make it a change that lasts. Make it pure reinvention.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Pure Reinvention. Keep the conversation going and get alerts when new podcasts are up by following us on Twitter @Pure Reinvention or sign up for our mailing list at purereinvention.com.